Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartmann. Now, if you ever wondered if we would get a guest on the show who was, I don't know, maybe like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but instead of the brawn, more of the brains, and maybe someone who's really focused on construction and technology and a female and kind of brilliant. Well, my friends, I think we've checked the box on all of those with Dr. Sarah Buchner. And I say Buchner only because she doesn't really trust people to say it like you should in Austrian, which is Buchner or something like that. This, my friend, is one of the most inspiring episodes that we have done, which is why this is episode number 450. As you will hear from Sarah, she started in the trades in carpentry, then moved to become a GC, and then along the path worked her entire way in the construction industry as a tradeswoman while continuing her education. It includes a PhD in civil engineering and data science. She ended up at Stanford Graduate School and in the heart of Silicon Valley, which is where she began Trunk Tools. Now, while Sarah's story alone is worth the listen and will inspire you, we also talk about innovation. We talk about why you must make in-person happen. We talk about why something called an oops section might be something that you implement immediately that changes your culture. And last but not least, Sarah will have you thinking differently about the power of AI and how you can leverage it and understand it in our construction community. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Sarah Buchner. As always, thank you for listening. Dr. Sarah Buchner, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I would like you, for me and the audience, to say your name in your native language. Is your native language, is it Austrian or is it just German? Are those different? Are they different dialects?
Yeah, so Austrian is a hardcore German dialect that per definition of languages would be its own language. But because we couldn't get it together, we still don't have an officially legal language. And so, I grew up purely talking Austrian within my family and within the village. And then when you go to school, most of school is in German.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so my name, Dr. Sarah Buchner.
Oh, there it is. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
But I love the Buchner.
Just because of us Anglos, we're not too sophisticated. We'll just go with Buchner. But it appears you've been checking off the boxes for all the Romance languages. I don't see Spanish, but I do see German, English, Italian, French, and Latin, a professional working degree of Latin. Where are you using Latin other than in your head to like figure out the roots of words?
Unfortunately, nowhere nowadays. But I was just a complete nerd growing up. I mean, I'm still a complete nerd. I'm just faking it better nowadays because society taught me to. But in school, there was an extracurricular that you could take in Latin. And so I started going down that path. And I love that language because it's actually math, right? It's not like any other language. There's a lot of intuition and exceptions and whatever. But Latin is just math. And so it was an easy one to learn. And then honestly, it gave me I was such a nerd that there was here it goes. Plus, I've never said this public. It's quite embarrassing. Early days of the internet, there was an online chat on a forum where all the other people talked about cool things. There was an online chat in Latin that you could text other people in Latin language and have conversations in Latin. And that's what I did with the internet when it came. And that's where I practiced most of me. And then you could Skype in Latin with other people or nerds. Yeah.
I was going to bail you out and say, listen, the stuff you're working on is really cool. I don't think you're a nerd, but after hearing that, no, I'm pretty sure you're right. That is incredibly nerdy. But I'm going to run down this little list here, and then I'm going to try something in my non-native language of English. Here we go. You, Sarah, carpenter at the age of 12, tradeswoman after that, traveled to more than 80 countries, and you've lived in 5 of them. You have an engineering PhD, Forbes 30 under 30. You got an MBA, why not? Who doesn't? From Stanford Graduate School of Business. And obviously, we're going to be talking about Trunk Tools and you being a founder in construction technology. Here is where I'm going to speak this other language, and I want you to take this any way you want to give some context, not only to your nerdiness, but what is happening in your life so far. Stillstand ist Rückschritt. How'd I do? Was that good?
Pretty good. Stillstand ist Rückschritt, yeah.
Oh my God. Say that one more time.
Stillstand ist Rückschritt.
And what does that mean?
It's slightly tough to translate. I think somebody tried to translate it on my LinkedIn, but it means when stopping equals going backwards. So that's just, for me, it has been a mantra in my life. It makes way more sense in German, but like it's more beautiful in German because we have more words, right? You know that the German language is very descriptive. And in English, what it best translates to is like, hey, even just like stopping equals to you going backwards in your life, in your career, and whatever, because while you stop, you could have moved forward. That's kind of like the idea behind it. Yeah, I mean, obviously my resume is a little bit insane, but I'm very driven, and that has been a mantra for me.
So maybe just a little bit of context. When you say that you grew up under some tough circumstances in a rural part of Austria, I know the story. I just watched it. It's the story of Schwarzenegger. It was on Netflix, and it was incredible. Now, there's some obvious departures in your story, but maybe give the audience and me just a little context. What was it like growing up? Like geographically, what were you doing? And what led to you picking up a hammer and becoming a carpenter at the age of 12?
Yeah. I honestly have not watched much about Schwarzenegger's upbringing, so I have no idea. What I think until this day, he's faking his accent. I don't think it's real, but that's just me. It's a conspiracy theory I have.
I like it.
I grew up, not that close, but close-ish to like where he grew up. My dad became a carpenter, but it was a very poor environment from an economic perspective, but also like it was very unsafe, lots of abuse and stuff like that. So it was a terrible childhood for me personally. And money was so short, and my dad started taking me on construction sites to like make money. And I was about 12 when I started actually working on real jobs. And to be honest, like I also really liked it. I liked the fact that I would make some of the money. I'm sure like I didn't make all of what I was actually making, but I liked the fact of making some money. I also really liked the fact of producing something haptic, right? Producing something that is real, that has real impact right there. And yeah, and so I just followed that path. And for the longest time, I was like, maybe I'm just going to be a carpenter. And that would have also totally been fine, right? Nobody in my family ever went to college. And yeah, I had like really smart teacher at one point who was like, you're really smart, you should consider college. And I was really like, what is college? I have no idea. But the good, people always say like, I'm living the American dream. Partially, absolutely, I'm living the American dream. I'm also living the European dream because the socialist countries I grew up in actually gave me free education. So I don't think I could have afforded all of the education that I have in a country where education is not free, right?
How long did it take for you to understand that not only you have a skill set, this made sense to you, you were good at it, not only could you actually build stuff with your hands in the carpentry setting, but also you could lead a team that was building something tangible. And then obviously you started leading larger and larger projects. How early did that recognition come to you?
I mean, I think that's the really cool thing about construction, right? You get a lot of responsibility really early in your career.
Yeah.
And also like monetary responsibility. Like I was construction manager where I was like responsibility for the P&L and everything, for everything pretty much. When I was like 19 for a $20 million job. So somebody gave $20 million to a 19-year-old. Sorry, which other industry does that? It's kind of nuts. But what's beautiful about construction is that if you are good with something else than just your hands, you very quickly get pushed into leadership positions. And that's what happened with me. I was really good at math. I had a big brain, so I was good at remembering blueprints and like stuff like that. Right. So, and there's also a lot of people who don't want to manage. Right. And I was always like, I'm good, right? Like I can tell other people what to do. Like that's great. And so I fell into that, that foreman, that superintendent kind of position, and then became a project manager fairly quickly, again, in my teenager years. And then obviously in my early 20s, I got bigger and bigger jobs. That's how this works in construction, right? You're good. You get more responsibility. You kill that. Okay, you get even more. And so I was doing like hundreds of millions of dollars projects in my 20s, which without much education, to be honest, but it's just construction.
It's just construction, right? Yeah, and you're 100% right. Where I look back and I had this very different context, but was looking around. I was like 27. I had like 25 direct reports, and we were like farther away, so everyone just left us alone. And I said the same thing. I'm like, what business does this? I don't even know what I'm doing. Now, if you can survive that and you can learn from it, you realize what a gift that is. Tell me what you learned just about different cultures, or maybe reinforced what you already knew about different cultures coming from Europe.
I lived and I bounced around a little bit around the world because I got scholarships for my studies. So I did almost all my school on the side, right? Which works in Europe because you just have to show up for exams and then deliver whatever homework, but you don't have to be in class.
Okay.
And so that's how I worked full time through all my degrees, because I also needed the cash, right? But it was like super valuable actually, because you use the knowledge from class in the job and you use the knowledge from the job in class. So I'm a big advocate of actually combining real life experience with educational experience. And that's also something my parents taught me, like there's two ways out of poverty. It's hard work and it's education, right? Which they didn't get access to education. So I was just like, okay, cool. They tell me it's like either or. I was like, let's just do both. And so I followed that principle for a long time. I did my PhD on the side. I did all of this stuff while full-time working. And I became more and more successful, because that's ultimately what happens if you're really like driven and smart and you get lucky. My whole life, somebody told me I can't do something. I can't be a carpenter because I'm a woman. I can't be a carpenter because I'm too young. I can't be a manager on a construction site because XYZ. And like, oh God, I should dye my hair because blonde women are not being taken seriously. I can't do a PhD because women don't have the stamina to finish an engineering PhD. Like the things I've heard. And every time somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm like, watch me. And so I wanted to learn about, Silicon Valley and America in general. And I wanted to be in a society where the sky is not even the limit. And that's why I came to this country. So I purely came for the American dream, full on. I did fine in Europe, but wasn't an economic refugee. But in a way, I'm an economic refugee, yes.
There's so much to unpack in that. I'd be fascinated on some other time, maybe a round two, just to dive into some of those cultural norms and the point at which an individual looks around and says, this isn't how everybody else lives. That's just how we choose to live and behave and what's normal here. And then you go to a different environment. We won't go into it, but California and Palo Alto and Silicon Valley and the norms and the expectations of theirs, to someone else on the other part of the world, they'd be like, what? That's normal there? You're kidding me.
But to give you one sentence there, up until I landed here, and I'm obviously super lucky to get into Stanford. I applied for some other schools as well, but before I came to the United States of America, I never told people that I started as a carpenter. I was ashamed that I did come from a family that didn't go to college. I was ashamed that I grew up poor. I was ashamed that I had to make it myself. I was ashamed that I worked with my hands, because that's what they tell you over there. And it took me a few years here to be able to speak with you in a public audience and be like, yeah, I'm freaking proud. I'm so blue collar. Like, it still comes out at times, right? I pretend to be CEO. Well, I'm very blue collar, and that's totally okay. And then and I hope my kids will also be blue collar, because dude, that's the bone of our economy. Let's be real about that.
I want to ask you here before we get on, I don't know if this is a good question or not, but you've mentioned luck now twice. How do you think about the growth of your own company, your career path, your background? How do you think about the differences between luck and risk?
It's a very deep question. I think about luck, like you have to put yourself in a position where luck can happen to you.
And what do you mean by that?
It's like you have to give yourself chances to be lucky, which still doesn't guarantee you're going to get lucky. But what guarantees you that you will not get lucky is if you don't put yourself in the position. And I think that's a lot. Like, I don't know, people constantly tell me I'm such a risk taker, and I don't see it like that at all. And I think maybe I just have a very deconstructed view on risk. And I got lucky because I tried a lot, and I got rejected from so many jobs in my life and from so many business schools and PhD programs and whatever. But the one time that I didn't get rejected, I got the MBA from Stanford, right? And so when you look at my resume, it looks very like perfect, but you only see the parts that worked out. You don't see the 99 other percent of things that didn't work out, right?
Yeah.
You don't see the businesses that I failed. You don't see the jobs I didn't get, or, you know, and so I think that's people are so afraid of failure because they have to look themselves in the mirror and be like, yeah, you failed. But for me, and I try to tell this our teams, the only real failure is not to try, right? Like I mean, there's so many of these sentences out there, but we have a leadership example. We have an oops section in every one of our all hands. Okay, so the whole company watches everybody else. And then there's an oops section where people just raise their hand and tell how they messed up. Okay, publicly.
Yes.
And I'm in this meeting, okay, and people tell me, yeah, it's like, we reprocessed the wrong data set and it cost us $25,000, right? And I'm sitting there and my internal reaction is like, we just lost $25,000. But my external reaction is like, yeah, congratulations. And the reason why I'm saying yes, congratulations is because I want to create an environment where people feel comfortable to fail, and they know that their job and their standard and everything is still secure, even so they fail. Because otherwise I'm creating an environment of fear where people don't try. And if people don't try, there's no innovation, there's nothing happening. I almost wish we could have like an anti-LinkedIn, and I would be the first person on there and like tell you all the times I got rejected from McKinsey or from Harvard or like from whatever, right? And then you compare this, and like the anti-LinkedIn would be 99% of the page, and 1% of the page would be like my actual LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
Why are we not doing this? But like, and there is, you know, it's interesting. Look at Amazon as a business, right? Like everybody's like, wow, like what a success. There's a case study on Amazon that literally shows, it's like 30 pages. It's a whatever Harvard, Stanford one that shows all the things that Amazon tried and failed. They tried to get into phones. They tried to, like, Apple tried to get into cars. Like these amazing businesses failed too. These amazing humans failed too. Like, the only failure is not trying to succeed.
Yeah, I love that. All right, I want to transition to trunk tools here. I'm going to read something here. I want you to give us a little context about maybe what it means, and then tell us a little bit more about what's happening and maybe a high-level overview of trunk tools. Generative AI, artificial intelligence, is the answer to construction's long-standing incapability to adopt and leverage technology. It's a big sentence. There's some big words in there. There's a strong like meaning behind it that my personal experience, I couldn't agree with more. I'm aware of what you speak. Maybe give us some context of what that is in terms of what you're doing and how you're leading trunk tools.
Yeah. I love which sentences you're pulling out stuff that I write somewhere on a plane, and then it's like, wow. So what's the problem that we're solving? Maybe let's start there, right? Like, I think construction, one of the biggest problems in our industry is that we have a lot of data, but we have no utilization of that data.
Yep.
And reasons for that is because the data is in silos. Like, so there's like a technical problem because it's literally in different buckets. But then also the data itself is super. So there's three problems. It's siloed, it's super unstructured, and it's constantly changing. So if we think about these problems, it's humanly impossible to get a good grasp of the data and therefore everything that's going on a job site. And to give you an example, let's take an average high-rise, $500 million high-rise. Do you want to take a guess how many pages of documents there are for a $500 million job? Pages. How many PDFs, blueprints, RFIs, submittal specs? Yeah.
I don't know. A million? Couple million?
Yeah, you're pretty good. 3.6 million pages of documents is our average count right now for one hire.
Almost 4 million pages.
Which, by the way, if you print it, the stack of paper is 3 times as high as the hires.
3 times the size of what?
So if we take a $500 million high rise with like 30, 40 floors,
yes,
the stack of paper describing that building is 3 times as high as the building itself. What happens if you have, is the data should theoretically tell us what to build, right? Like that's the whole idea behind like blueprints and RFIs and whatever.
Right.
And in a stack of paper that is 3 times as high as the building, there will be data discrepancies. Like there's no doubts that there's inconsistencies because many humans are producing all of this paper, right?
Yep.
The data discrepancies itself account for 65% of rework, which is a total of 6.5% of construction cost. So 6.5% of every building is just because of data discrepancies, which accounts for a total economic loss of $1 trillion a year. 3% of the world's CO2 emissions because of data discrepancies in our construction data. I can get my plastic straw back in my smoothie if we just solve this data problem in construction, okay? And so what we do is we go into all these silos. So we have integrations in all these different systems, Autodesk, Procore, SharePoint, whatever. We take all of the data and then we use different very complex AI systems to take this stack of unstructured data and turn it into structured data. And then we turn the structured data into a knowledge graph. That sounds very complex right now, but just think about it. We're pretty much creating a BIM model without the 3D visualization. So we're connecting all the different dots and pieces of data together in construction fully algorithmically through AI, and we're training a massive brain. So that's why we call it a brain behind construction. Right. So we have one AI brain on each job that remembers everything of that job with all the different data and all the different silos. And then you can interact with that brain, right? I can ask that brain and be like, hey, the bathtub in the second floor, like, what's the width or whatever, right? And then our system will spit up like, okay, this is how wide it should be, but by the way, the specs and the submittals don't match or something like that, right? Or like, hey, does this door 2010-3 have power actuated hardware? And instead of you trying to find this in the finishing schedule and in the blueprints and whatever, you throw the question against our system, we come back and tell you, actually, finishing schedule says, yes, you need power actuated hardware. However, the electrical drawings don't have an outlet there, right? So we show these data discrepancies like algorithmically and just help people really understand what they're supposed to build. So that was the first step. And then we realized like, wow, we have this super powerful brain that knows more about your job than all of you humans together. Right. What else can this brain do? And now this brain is powering so-called AI agents or AI assistants, whatever word you want to use, right? That can then take over full workflow. So we have an AI agent that compares submittals with specs, which before that a human was, right? We have AI agents that help with bidding, that help with like RFI creation or like, you name it. So we are augmenting. I like to say we're not doing AI. I like to say we're doing IA, which stands for intelligence augmentation, where we're really augmenting the humans with artificial intelligence, but we're not like getting rid of humans. Like, why would we? Like humans are good at certain things. Humans are not good at memorizing millions of pages of documentation. Like,
no. Yeah. I highlighted that and I like that AI, artificial intelligence, as IA, which is intelligence augmentation. And I like that because go to anyone on the job, whether they're the project executive or they're doing the HVAC, like whatever it is. And you say, hey, has anything happened in the last 24 hours that you thought was a waste of time? That was dumb, or that's conflicting with what I thought we were going to do. And now I have to change and we lost time and money. When I ask that, they'll say, did you say 24 hours? That probably all just happened in the last 60 minutes, So yeah. I think we're so used to that. I do want to ask you about these agents. You listed 3 on the site: a scheduling agent. That makes sense to me. A Q&A agent. Sounds great. I like that. And then I see a trade incentive agent. And I'm thinking someone's got a PhD and MBA from Stanford. I'm not smart enough to know what a trade incentive agent is, a TIA. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I actually love it. It was one of the first ones we did. It's we have a productivity crisis in construction more than like a labor shortage in my mind.
Couldn't agree more.
Because if you actually look at like how low our productivity is, and it's not because people are lazy, it's just because it's the most uncoordinated process ever. And so what the trade incentive agent does, looks at schedule data, which most of the time is like 4-week look ahead, 6-week look ahead, whatever we get, right?
Okay.
And the AI is analyzing based on economic principles, pretty much like, and construction data from our historic training data sets, is analyzing how we can incentivize crews to increase output.
Yeah.
Not by working harder, but by working smarter, and then they're monitoring incentivized to do that. So it's a sophisticated way to do performance incentives.
Okay. What have you learned about bringing people's defenses down when they are resistant to change?
10, 15 years ago, different story. I think nowadays people are not that resistant to change anymore in construction as we make them to be. I think construction doesn't have a problem of not wanting to adopt technology. I think most of construction technology is not adoptable. And I'm talking about software that's from the 90s, that UI has like, I need 15 clicks to get to where I want to be. Like, It's just terrifying. Like, you please don't get me started on how bad most of construction software is. Like, the software that these workers use in their day-to-day life, in their private life, is 10 times better than what they get in their job. And so now we are surprised why they don't want to adopt technology. What actually happened in early 2023 was like ChatGPT, and the whole world was like, ooh, there's AI.
Right.
That's not what happened. Like AI, my PhD was about natural language processing, right? That stuff has been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so when we now ask an LLM or ChatGPT something and it gives us an answer, we're like, oh my God, it gives me an accurate deterministic answer. It's like, no. It's just gotten so good to probabilistic guess what you want to hear, right? And so why is that important for construction? Because we can now use these pieces of technology to interact with data and software in a semantic way. And why is it important? Is because that's how construction works. We like to talk. We like to, take our walkie-talkie and be like, what color should I paint this wall in? And instead of the human on the other side trying to figure this out, we can now use probabilistic models and large language models and so on to answer back in the same way they want to be answered to, which is language. And not buttons, and not a new software that I have to sit down and learn. If I ever have to go to a superintendent again and be like, you need 2 weeks of training to use a PMS that you will maybe have a positive interaction with 6 months later, you know what he or she's gonna tell you? Leave, because they are so busy, they're so stressed. And I would have this thing where it's like, if you work on a job site, you're running away from a tiger. And while you run away from a tiger, somebody tells you like, hey, here, do a 2-week training. And maybe then you run faster in 3 months. It's like, I'm going to be dead. Like, I don't care about that. And people don't understand that. And so we I don't want to use the word dumb down, but we're trying to dumb down everything we do in a way that people get ROI in the first use. Mm-hmm. If you can text message, all of our software is based on text message if you want to, right? There's software as well, but you can just use text message. You can text our trunkless phone number and be like, what color should I paint this wall? We'll give you an answer in seconds.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's an element of caring and thoughtfulness about the lives of the people that we hope to help with technology. And to your point, I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation to say, I'm going to give you this new tool and you are going to get, if not way more value than you anticipated, you're going to get a lot of value from it from the first time. And it's just going to make sense. It's going to be intuitive, right? And to your point, it's like in our private lives, there are so many things we use that just make sense. And so many examples we can have. We're like, that's super easy. And then we put them on a job site and you're like, well, there's a 19-step process And you're like,
Right.
what?
But it's really like, that would never work in consumer. And also, by the way, it wouldn't work in hardware.
No.
Like, hey, I'm going to sell you a drill, but you're going to have to practice for 2 weeks and then you'll have a positive impact of that 6 months later. This drill is never going to sell. Why do we assume in software that's how it's going to work?
Yeah. All right. I'm watching the time. You, my friend, Sarah, you're very busy here. I do want to ask you, though, given your nerdery and your significant accomplishments, both impressive, any books or podcasts that throughout your career or anything comes to mind, or maybe something recent or something that you would say this really made a meaningful impact that you might share with me and the audience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can come up with 2 that actually have made a significant impact in the last few years. There's a book called The Psychology of Money.
Morgan Housel.
That I find a bunch of that stuff I found really interesting, especially with my move from a socialist European society into like the heart of capitalism, Silicon Valley, and also with my, I climbed up their socioeconomic ranks, and so I think there's lots of questions of the importance of money and like what capitalism does and what it means, and so I like those topics. I think it's an interesting book. The second one is almost the counter opposite of that is Jeff Pfeffer was a professor of mine at Stanford, and he is the best researcher in the world when it comes to power. And so he writes lots of books on like the 7 rules of power and whatever. Jeff Pfeffer and his books around power are incredibly polarizing and incredibly impactful for my career. I mean, I was lucky to be a student in his class, but his advice is great. Read those books.
Okay. Can you give me one nugget? One of my favorite books is right behind me. It's Robert Greene's book called The 48 Laws of Power, it's really dense. And he goes back through history and tells all these crazy stories about people you've never heard of and situations of power. What, if you'd say, I'm going to give you one nugget. Here's the thing that comes top of mind that I use or I think about consistently. What one jumps to mind? Anything?
I think the easiest one that's good for this audience that he talks a lot about is in-person interactions, for example. And everybody has ever been in sales knows that, right? But one of his, rules or whatever is just like make in-person happen and use whatever kind of like excuses that you can to get there. And I did a lot of that when I was at Stanford trying to build out my network here in this country. I actually reached out to almost every construction CEO in this country. And I was like, hey, I'm doing research for Stanford. And then, some of them would respond and actually like would want to, help me with my research, which was great. And then it would just be like, hey, by the way, I'm like in whatever, Massachusetts anyways in 2 weeks. Like, do you just want to do this in person? I was not going to be in Massachusetts, right? But like, then they would be like, oh, cool. Yeah. Like, which date are you here? And I would just like fly there for like a 3-hour meeting to get that in-person touch point with whatever CEO of XYZ, because it's a very different story if you actually had an interpersonal relationship in person with somebody than not. And so like a lot of these very tangible ideas are in Jeff Pfeffer's book around how do you get power through interpersonal connections and how can you leverage that for your career and for your life.
I love it.
The power of network and of in-person network is undescribable, especially in an industry like construction.
We have so much going on. We can only see 6 inches in front of our nose. And part of what you need to break out of that is to literally leave that environment. Go be in person someplace else, see something new, visit a new place to where these differences and ideas about how other people do things, some of which after you learn them are like, that's so smart. That's so common sense. Why aren't we doing that? But you got to break out of your day to day. And I think what you shared there is 100%. And I'm thinking, me in person, if we could do this in person, this is good. This is efficient, but I'd much rather spend time with you. And I think being influential, being persuasive, being more powerful, I'm sure those are all real closely related. All right, Dr. Sarah Buchner. thank you for the work that you're doing, and congratulations just on the growth. That's I can only imagine what that's like in there. What I do know is probably you don't have a whole lot of time. So I appreciate you making it for me, and best of luck in the future.
Thanks for having me. Very exciting.
All right then, friends, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Sarah Buchner. For more information on trunk tools, go to trunktools.com. Check it out. And I believe this is one version of the future of the construction industry. And obviously it is here today. And her success is just one more example of what happens when you get really smart, passionate people who grew up in the industry thinking differently about how we can be more productive and safer and smarter about what we do every day. So thank you for listening. If you got value from this episode, please share it with your network. People look to you to figure out what they should be listening to with their limited time and attention. So if you would do that, we'd appreciate that. Share it with your team, share it with your network. And as always, thank you for listening. We're going to close out like we always do with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.